Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to CoHo BC's Selling a Portion of Your Property. My name is Noam Dolgan, and I'm joined today by Brian Horowitz and David Hale to talk about how you can sell a portion of your property, whether you are a property owner entirely yourself, or you're currently in a co-ownership relationship and want to sell your share. Or are involved in a co-op or other initiative. We're delighted to have such an exciting large turnout for this session to prove the concept that this is a viable and doable way of gaining equity out of your property, bringing community into your property, and making better use of property that you might currently own. So before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that when talking about British Columbia, we are talking about lands that are the historic unceded territories of many different peoples across the province. And it is with great respect that we acknowledge our current roles under legal land tenure as stewards of this land, and we acknowledge the historic peoples who've stewarded and protected these lands for many generations, and we take that responsibility that now comes to us very seriously. So what is CoHo BC? For those of you who are new to CoHo, CoHo BC is an affiliation of professionals who work to promote co-ownership as a viable and valuable housing option across our province. We provide resources and professional support to assist groups growing through the co-ownership process. We assist in the creation of co-ownership groups through a dating pool, chance to meet other like-minded individuals or families to co-own with. And we help facilitate the resale of shared property interests to other potential buyers or partners. We are a collection of real estate agents, lawyers, builders, financiers, others with experience and expertise in this topic. And we are here to help you do this process right from beginning to end. So why would somebody want to sell a portion of their property? Each of us probably has our own reasons for being here today and what brings us to thinking about this as a possibility. But some of the most common reasons people come to us are to gain access to assets that are locked up in real estate, so they can travel, they can retire, they can support family in their real estate endeavors. It allows an opportunity to stay and age in your home, in your neighborhood, and around your existing support systems. Far too often, when it's time to take your assets out of your property or to downsize, you're forced to move into areas that do have condos or retirement communities or townhomes or other places. But this is an opportunity to stay in your home, in your neighborhood that might not be otherwise zoned or appropriate for multifamily use. It allows you to partner with people you trust who are nearby and can look after you if needed, take responsibilities for buildings, property, bill payments, or even your farm or gardening of the land. So you can really have that support on the property and also the support for you personally, right? To have those mutual support systems, to have community, and create a more positive housing experience at whatever stage in life you are, not just as a retiree, but maybe as a young family or as an individual. Really have that community that all of us, I think, crave very much. Having a partner on your property, of course, reduces the ongoing costs of property ownership, right? Splitting the insurance, splitting the taxes, splitting the maintenance costs, etc. And a little bit altruistically, it creates a pathway for someone who can't otherwise afford a property like yours into home ownership. And that can be great for family or friends, or it can be a great pathway to offer to somebody who's a stranger. As we like to say, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. So there's a lot of motivations of what might bring you to this pathway, but they tend to be in that financial and social elements, creating those pathways for yourself. We like to talk about co-ownership not just being about cheaper housing, but about better housing for less money, right? Better, more supportive, more environmentally friendly, more communal housing options for all of us. Oh, here's the slide I referred to earlier. So who is CoHo BC? We are a collection of professionals with experience and expertise in collective housing to help guide you through the process and make sure to set you up for success. So don't reinvent the wheel, don't wing it, use the experts and make sure that you've got the right social, the right economic, and the right legal structures to help to have a solid relationship well into the future. This is not a unique BC idea. This is part of an international movement. We see co-ownership initiatives popping up across the world, in Europe, in Australia, in the United States, and across Canada. This is just a few of the organizations which have come about to address this need, and we're excited to be the local initiative, really, and one of the pioneers pushing this forward around the globe. So who are we? My name is Noam Dolgan. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a realtor based in Metro Vancouver and a co-founder of CoHo BC. I specialize in co-ownership, sustainable living, and green homes. I like to say just real homes for real people and outside the box real estate thinking. So trying to take best advantage of the housing market in all of its forms, whether it be strata, leasehold, co-op, or co-ownership, to think creatively about your housing needs, your abilities, and finding a solution that works best for you. We're joined today by two other real estate agents as well. Brian Horowitz, who's a co-ownership specialist on Vancouver Island, based in the Duncan, Cowichan Valley area, and David Hale, who's the founder of Shared Home Ownership Victoria, one of our partner groups under the CoHo umbrella, who's in Victoria himself. And you'll hear from them a little bit later about their experiences selling shares in property in their regions. But before we get too deep into it, want to hear a little bit about who's with us today, and find out what brings you here, and what your current situation is. So we'll do a couple quick polls. So if you have a moment to answer this question, get a sense for who's at the table. The question is, have you ever co-owned property in the past or present? I currently co-own the property I live on. I currently co-own an investment property. I have co-owned in the past, or I have never co-owned property. Nice. We've got a nice diverse mix of people coming in here. It looks like the majority of people here have not co-owned. You're looking at this for the first time, but we definitely have some folks who currently co-own and some folks who've done this in the past. This is not a new concept. People have been co-owning for a long time. But CoHo BC is here really to help you make sure you do it right, you set yourself up for success, and we're trying to professionalize and streamline the process, and we're proving the market that you can sell shares in properties as well, so you can get into a co-ownership relationship and with some confidence that down the road you could potentially sell off your share and not have to dislocate your partner when the time comes that you want to leave. Poll number 2, what kind of property do you own currently? Are you in a, hold on a second. There we go. Sorry, having some quick technical problems here. There we go. What kind of property are you in? Are you in a single family home? Are you on acreage? Are you a member of a co-op or other co-ownership based community? Or at this stage, do you not own property? You're just here to learn about the concept in general. So it looks like we've got a real mix here, mostly people in single family homes across the province, a large number of people in acreage, a few in co-ops. So yeah, all right, we've got a nice diverse crowd here today. Thank you all for coming. And if you have questions about your particular situation, we'll have time for questions at the end. And of course, the folks, David, Brian, and myself are all available to talk to you after about your specific situation, depending on where you are in the province. So as I mentioned, co-ownership of property is nothing new. Before 1966 in BC, there was no Strata Act. So if you wanted to own a portion of property, you had to do it through a co-ownership model. And this picture down here of the Lee building is an example of that. A building that was originally owned by one person and then purchased by a collective in the 50s, and still exists as a co-ownership property in the province. In the 60s and 70s, we saw ownership co-ops taking off, some in the cities and many in our rural areas and on the islands, where people would come together collectively to buy properties. More recently, we've seen a real growth in a movement called co-housing, which is something we're very excited about, which is really a community based around shared space and common support, and a lot of collective amenities. And usually there's a co-ownership stage involved in that, a co-development stage, even though in the end, most co-housing projects are strata. And certainly we've seen on a smaller scale, families, friends, investors co-owning all along, because there are some huge advantages. And of course, people don't realize is that all strata products, condos, duplexes, townhomes, bare land stratas, they're all co-owned to some degree, right? You may have separate title, you may own the inside of your unit, but the building as a whole is co-owned. And that's what the Strata Act was created for, was to make co-ownership possible. But with the rise in prices and with the fact that strata is not doable everywhere in the province, we're now seeing the direct co-ownership model growing as well. So why sell a share in your home? I dealt with some of these already right off the bat. The big advantages we hear about are accessing equity to your property without having to move or to pay high reverse mortgage fees. So you can retire or support your family and their housing needs, etc. Build community and mutual support systems. Partner with people you trust who live nearby, who can look after you if needed, or take responsibility for buildings, or build better communities. Reduce the ongoing costs of home ownership. And then a few people don't often think about the ability to live in otherwise unavailable locations, like single family neighborhoods. The vast majority of our province is not zoned multifamily, though in those single family in quote areas, you often can have a suite or a secondary residence. And in fact, there's a big push now from the province to allow for 4 to 6 units on a single family property. But this is a way of allowing you to move into these areas, whether it be acreage or residential areas, and I said, and also creating a pathway for someone who can't otherwise afford. Sorry, apologies for the repeat slide. Who might buy a share in my property? Well, certainly we see people selling to their friends and family. We see folks, first-time home buyers, trying to get into the market through this pathway. We see a lot of young families trying to get into the market through this pathway. And we see downsizers and older adults, especially those people who want more community and support in their life and don't need the amount of space that a single family home would involve Investors love co-ownership because they have the best possible partner, the person who will look after the property for them and take all the responsibility of maintenance and bill payments, and they can just ride the market. And we like to say that anyone who can think collaboratively or outside the box can see a pathway for themselves through co-ownership. I was recently interviewed by a journalist who asked this question, right? Who's interested in co-ownership? And I said, well, there's first-time buyers in their 20s and 30s doing this. There's young families in their 30s and 40s doing this. There's downsizers in their 50s, 60s, and 70s doing this. We see all that. And he says, oh, so you mean everybody? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. For pretty much everybody at any time, whether it be for financial reasons or social reasons, or to reduce the amount of work that property ownership presents. There's a reason at any stage in life where co-ownership could work for you, which is why it's getting pretty popular and more popular than you would think. The recent surveys show that up to 50% of Canadians are open to co-ownership. That number might be a little bit high from that 2023 Ipsos survey. A recent survey from Remax showed that 22% of Canadians would be open to co-ownership. But there's no question that this could be a large portion of the market. And one thing, of course, that's interesting is that we're seeing that the younger people are, the more likely they are to be open to this as a possibility. Probably a response to the fact that outside of co-ownership, people often don't see any pathways to owning property. And so this becomes one of the few opportunities that are open to them. So the interest is growing, and presumably will only continue to grow as prices continue to continue being unavailable to people, and as that 18 to 34 demographic ages into more ownership. So what can co-ownership look like is really up to you. And when selling a portion of your property, you can decide before you get to frame your offering and decide what it is that you're offering people, right? Are you looking for communal living, sharing your house, your townhouse or condo with a roommate, with a shared living room, kitchen, etc.? That is certainly the most affordable option because you are sharing those spaces, and it certainly builds the most community. But it can also come with some of the largest challenges, and it's the hardest one to find someone who you're comfortable living that intimately with. So the majority of people we work with co-own in a way where everybody has their own private dwelling or suite. So looking at properties that have multiple dwellings on a single property, so 2 houses on one property on acreage, or a house, the laneway house, for example, in the city. We have some interesting historic properties that have 3, 4, or 5, up to 10 houses on a property. Old farming estates and other unique properties. And we also see folks co-owning on properties where the homes are divided into multiple suites. So as I mentioned, basement suites are legal now in most of the province, and the latest provincial laws are making that mandatory. And this is a way of, if one house has multiple suites on it, everyone can have their own space, their own kitchen, their own living room, and then you can just share access to the land, and that allows for the most, a product that is fairly equivalent to buying a strata product, right? Where you have your own space, but is usually cheaper and can allow people to have more access to yards or farms, etc. We do see people co-owning land-based businesses such as farms and rental properties, and of course investments as well. And similarly, how much to share is up to you, right? Do you just share the land and ownership, but everyone has their own private space, or do you have that collective home? Even if you have your own private space, are you gonna have some collective spaces? The yards, the shed, the garage, the laundry. Are you gonna have shared resources, tools, cars, farming equipment, hot tub, always being a favorite? And then socially, are you going to have collective meals, celebrations, Are you going to make a promise to babysit each other's children? This really is up to you. So you get to decide what you want, whether you're buying in together in the first place and you're creating it from scratch, or whether you're selling off a piece of a property that you own. You can say to yourself, what is my ideal situation, and how can I find the partner that best matches that? So there are some essential things to think about before you get into the co-ownership process. What is your timeline, right? Do you see yourself in this property forever? Or is this a 5-year stage and then you're going to want to go your separate ways? And this is an important question to ask because you want to find a partner who has similar goals to you on this one. If you're hoping to be in the property forever and your partner sees this as a 5-year plan, that's not necessarily impossible. Again, we can help with the resale of shares in that property, so your partner can sell out after 5 years and you can stay there. But it's always best if you have similar timelines and similar goals, so you don't have to worry about that. How much communal living do I want? I've talked about a lot already. And what kind of partner do I need? Sometimes it's not as obvious as you think. Do you want someone who's similar to you demographically, economically, or in family situation? You have young kids, you want someone else with young kids, you're a retiree, you want other retirees, or do you want someone who's complementary, right? You want a partner who has maintenance skills and house skills, or you're a retiree and you really want a young family to create that kid energy around the property. This also can come out from a financial perspective. You might be someone with a lot of equity and a lot of cash to put into a property, but you don't qualify for a mortgage because you're not working at the moment. Maybe you have a partner who doesn't have much of a down payment but has a really good job and can qualify for really good financing. That can also make a good partnership where two people who really can't afford to own or hold property themselves can come together and create a synergy to do it collectively. We see folks coming together for co-development, so where co-ownership becomes a stage in the process, and you build out a duplex or you convert an old heritage house to something that is strata. Again, with the new laws around multiplexes that has been initiated across the province, co-buying is a great pathway to then build out something that can be stratified. Or if you're a property owner, like most of you are here, you can partner up with a group of end users or with a developer to develop out your property and then sell off pieces of it down the road. So you can build your dream 2-bedroom, ground floor, single story garden suite, and then sell off the other units in your building. And so co-ownership would be a stage in that development process. Other considerations when co-owning, of course, financing. Everybody needs to be on a mortgage together. That's the law in Canada. So we have lots of systems to help protect you, to make sure that you're not someone else's delinquency or financial challenges don't hurt you. Exit strategy, what do you do when you want out, or if somebody dies or divorces? Delinquency, I just mentioned, how do you deal with that when it comes to financing? Ongoing disagreements, etc. So this is where a well thought through partnership agreement and a deliberate process really protects you and your partners. And that's why CoHo is realtors like ourselves who really understand the real estate side, and lawyers who understand the legal side to set you up from success the whole way through. This is clearly a very quick overview of this stuff. We do a much larger session on co-ownership. If you haven't been to our intro to co-ownership presentation before, recommend that you watch the video or come to our next future session where I go into all this stuff in much more detail. But quickly on this topic, right? For financing, as I said, all owners must be on the mortgage and can each be held responsible. So fortunately, we help set you up to protect yourself with solid down payments, solid legal agreements, and good underlying value of the property. so that one person's challenges don't hurt the other person. I mentioned financial synergy that co-ownership can create, where two folks who wouldn't otherwise be able to buy property can come together to buy property, or where someone, a retiree who couldn't qualify for a mortgage, could now qualify with their partner. And there actually are specialty products out there like the Van City Mixer Mortgage, and are more being developed to help people create a strong financial structure for their co-ownership relationship. Exit strategy, one of the big questions we often get: what happens when one person wants to sell? We generally recommend a 3-part process. When somebody decides that it's time to move on, or something happens in their life where they're forced to move on, it triggers this process where the remaining partner has the right to buy you out. So, for example, if you sell a share in your property and then 5 years later the person wants to leave, you could potentially rebuy that share back from them, and the legal agreement will help establish what the value would be at that time. Part 2 is that you both attempt to find a third party to replace the leaving party. You sell that share, and we'll hear some examples of how people have sold shares. When CoHo realtors sell shares, sometimes it's by an owner who owns the property as a whole, selling off a share in the property they own as a whole, and sometimes it's a co-ownership relationship where one of the parties wants to leave and they're looking for a new partner to come in. You'd usually have a system by which any new buyer has to be approved by the remaining party, so that you make sure that you're not just selling to any Joe Schmo, but that you have somebody who, again, shares your social values, who you can get along with, who you can communicate with, etc. So both parties would be involved in finding that new partner, but you can do that through your own social sphere, but also you can do that through MLS, through CoHo's network, etc. If stages 1 and 2 aren't possible, if you can't buy your partner out, if you can't find a new party, most groups have a for sale clause, which would allow you to sell the property as a whole. You both say, great, this worked for 10 years, but now it's time to go our separate ways. You take your money and you move on. Though some folks, especially folks selling shares of property they already own, choose not to have that third stage. They say from the beginning, I'm not willing to be forced off this property. I plan to be here for the rest of my life. And so the only two options are 1 and 2. So when we hear more about how we'll help you frame your offering, these are the kind of decisions that you will have to ask yourself: are you comfortable with this 3-part process, or do you want a slightly different process? What rules, what guidelines, what social connections, all this stuff will go into creating your offering. Because when you're selling a share in real estate, you're not just selling the real estate, right? You're selling the real estate, you're selling yourself as the partner, you're selling the financial structure, and you're selling the legal structure. And you need to have all 4 of those pieces in place to create a successful and marketable offering. But when all those 4 pieces are in place, you really do have a wonderful product that can be really, really appealing. So instead of hearing me talk about all this stuff theoretically, I think it's best for us to look at some real life examples of people who have done this. And so at this moment, I will turn the floor over to Brian Horowitz of Realocity Realty, and a CoHo Pro based in Duncan, to talk about his recent sale of a 65% ownership stake in a property on Gabriel Island. And I believe we're also joined by Mitch, the homeowner and remaining partner in this endeavor, to tell a little bit about how this worked for him. So Brian and Mitch, thank you guys for being here. We look forward to hearing your story.
Right on. Well done, Noam. Thanks for being here. Well, yeah, so co-ownership's been a big part of my business since day one, becoming an agent. I'm really connected to it at a heart level, and now on a professional level. Yeah, so as every property, person, and co-ownership endeavor is unique, the process and template does not fluctuate that much. So yeah, the following is a summary of a recent co-ownership sale I had the honor of facilitating on a lovely acreage on Gabriola Island. On behalf of the two sellers, Mitch and Angela, who were at a point in their life where it was time to make a move and sell. Yet one of the sellers, being Mitch, wasn't ready to let go. And thus, this is Mitch's story. Next slide, please. Thanks. Step one, connect and explore options. Well, it all starts with reaching out, and that's exactly what Mitch did. An email led to a phone call where Mitch explained his situation to me and that he was open to exploring the potential of co-ownership on his property. The co-ownership was light and not too detailed as we discussed basic co-ownership considerations and left it at that. Fast forward 6 months later, and Mitch reached out to me once again, yet this time with more clarity and a readiness to commit to the process. We organized a Zoom meeting where we discussed the process and his property in more detail. As well, at this point, I provided Mitch with our master co-ownership checklist in order for him and Angela to get familiarized with the essential co-ownership considerations, as well made appropriate connections by providing referrals to real estate lawyers familiarized in co-ownership and referrals to lenders with experience in shared financing. I'm super happy Mitch is here tonight and excited to bring him into the conversation at this time. Mitch, it's a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks for being here. As we get into this presentation, I'm wondering if you can share with us, that fundamental question on why you chose to sell a portion of your property.
Oh, hi, Brian. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, why? It's a big question. How long do we have? There's a lot of reasons I chose to do it. I guess and I think that's one of the hardest things about doing this is that there's so much at stake, right? When you're doing this, and a lot of things to weigh. So the things that I was really weighing was that my marriage was ending, and we had to do something with our property. I was still living there. My ex had moved to Courtney. I live on Gabriola Island, as Brian said, or I did until recently. So that was a big driver for me, a change in relationship and a change in what I was doing with my life. I was living a lot in Nanaimo. I was working in Nanaimo, and I had one son with me, and it was getting to be hard to do. But there was also this part of me that I had moved there to this 5-acre piece 10 years ago with my wife and my little kids, and we'd raised kids there. We built the house. We really created this amazing um, property sort of project there that it was really beautiful, and I really connected to the land. And so, and I've always really wanted to keep something to give my sons as they're going off now to university, some kind of home base. So there was a lot of emotional stuff for me in the mix, but there was also this social reason that I have that I really believe a lot in collaboration and acting together and sharing, and I get very frustrated that the world that I live in seems to be always trying to make us against each other. And I'd seen it before. This is the first real estate deal I'd done. So it's just not a process that encourages people to share. And I also wanted to do something about the housing crisis on Gabriola. I didn't want to just sell another, retirement home, basically. I wanted to do something different with my land. And I think the land that was asking for it, because we'd already started kind of a sharing project with another person. So that's and I guess, the final thing is that I seem to love to do things, take on challenges. So this felt like a big challenge, and I stepped into it, kind of knowing that, but seeing if what could be done. So it was a very long story of going through it all, but happy to turn it back over to you, Brian.
Right on. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a clarity on why. There are many reasons why, we people choose this route. it was an honor working with Mitch. And so now that things were
Could I just
starting.
add, could I just, sorry, Brian, could I just add one more thing that I think was just really important? That was a
Absolutely.
consideration for me, was the money. I mean, it's about the money too. And for me, this was a way that I could, my situation was very unique because I sold both. So I sold it and I bought it back in a way. And this was a way that I could keep my money in something, the equity that I was getting out of my land, in the land itself, without losing it. It's also an investment for me.
Copy that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. And a way for you to for your partner at the time, for Angela, to compensate her half of the value of the entire property, and to create the opportunity for you to remain, get a little bit of cash and have some equity in real estate as well too. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So, so things were starting to move at this point in our relationship, in towards listing a portion of the property for sale. So, at this point, I coordinated a time to meet with Mitch on site for a property walkthrough. Connecting on the property really does get the juices flowing, adding excitement to the process. Mitch and I, we took our time walking through the property, allowing us to get to know each other more on a personal level, as well allowing me to become more familiar with the lay of the land, the housing components, the proposed shared spaces, and the overall general condition of the property. As we walked, we bounced ideas back and forth and talked about different scenarios on how his and Angela's property could be shared. After our property walkthrough, I now had the necessary information in order to provide a detailed comparative market analysis in order to assist in placing value on the entire property. And this price point was in line with current and local activity at that specific time, and most importantly, a price point that Mitch and Angela were happy with. Now, placing value is a key component to co-ownership, as from here, establishing price points on different percentages is much more easily identifiable. Next slide, please. Awesome, thanks. Step 2, creating the offering. Now that we had the overall value agreed upon, we were in a position to establish portions of interest. Now, there are many different ways to divide a property into portions of interest, and each single percentage point can equate to a lot of money. And finding a happy medium on price points that are both appealing to the seller and potential buyers is the primary goal at this point. As well, just as importantly, making sure each portion of interest is sellable down the road. So a primary goal in collaborative real estate endeavors is to create win-win situations where the seller can get the funds they desire, while at the same time, a community-minded buyer can get better housing at a lower price point, both speaking to affordability and community. So after crunching numbers and looking at different scenarios, we decided that a 65-35 percentage split would work well on this property. We felt this was the happy medium in order to create that win-win situation, both for Mitch and Angela and the new buyers. So now that we had identified the pricing and the specific portions of interest, we were now ready to focus on a primary document for the listing. And that primary document is known as the agreement overview, touching base on the social framework, the legal framework, and the economic framework. Altogether, these three main components are the most important details to look at when it comes to compiling a detailed agreement overview, as this document clearly explains how the property will be shared. So, starting off at the social component of this, social alignment, it's integral to successful collaborations. As these deals, they're not just about the money. They're just as importantly about connecting with like-minded people, people who you can get along with, people who you can share certain values with, people who you can trust. And the legal framework, on the other hand, is much more pragmatic, outlining the general terms of how the property will be shared, including the forms of ownership, governance, what's exclusive, what is shared, the selling process, and much more, all tailored to the specific property. The economic framework is also incorporated into the agreement overview, touching base on how expenses will be shared, as not all expenses are shared proportionately. When it comes to shared financing, those details get added to the actual legal agreement down the road when the primary lawyer takes the agreement overview to the next level towards an official co-ownership agreement. So this agreement overview is an essential listing document that brings clarity to all interested parties who reach out to learn more about the offering and how the property is set to be shared. It's the general agreement acting as the primary worksheet for the seller and potential buyers to work with. Now, Noam was alluding earlier, an advantage in co-ownership sales is that the seller gets to set the stage and present the general terms of this agreement overview according to their wishes. So by now, there has been much time spent getting the back-end information prepared, and at this time, we were ready to prep the property and prep the listing. A clean and well-prepared property makes a huge difference when it comes to selling real estate. Mitch and Angela did an amazing job prepping the property. No stone was left unturned. The pictures and the video turned out great, and things were looking really good. As far as prepping the listing on my end, and in addition to my typical selling checklist, I prepared specific buyer's agent notes clarifying how offers will be dealt with, as well clarified specific ownership clauses pertaining to the proportionate sale needing to be included in any potential offer. So now that the property and the listing were all set, here we were finally in a position to list the property. We felt ready and confident to share this unique offering with the world and went live with the listing. Next slide, please. All right, step 3, the selling process. Well, preparation truly is essential. A lot of hard work had been done on all our parts by now, as we have spent much time getting ready and making appropriate connections. The stage was set and the plan was in place. We listed the property, and right away, there was a tremendous amount of interest. And we did offer the property in its entirety as well, in the fine print on the listing. And thus we had different types of buyers showing interest. Some buyers keen to purchase the property outright, and other buyers more interested in the co-ownership offering. Ultimately, though, we wanted to actualize the sale of the portion of interest. And in case this didn't work out, we did have the option to sell the property outright. So many longtime agents were intrigued with the listing, and quite a few had their doubts. Yet I knew in my heart, with all the hard work we had done and the connections we had in place with the lawyer and the lender, that we were well prepared and ready to take this on. The property and the listing were in fine form, and with interested parties reaching out, we could focus on our primary goal, finding a like-minded partner. So one thing to note is selling a portion of interest almost allows for a seller to have their cake and eat it too. Yet sellers need to know that co-ownership sales are not a cakewalk. And usually when it comes to showings, the properties are vacant. A buyer shows up with their agent and views the property. All information is kept confidential as buyers and sellers hold their cards close to their chest. This is not the case when it comes to showings on co-ownership sales. Now, as social cohesion is imperative to the success of collaborations, much transparency is required between all parties right from the get-go. Typically in co-ownership sales, the seller is present during showings alongside interested parties to get a feel for potential alignment. Walking the property together with interested parties is a great way for sellers to meet potential partners. So the showings went well, and it was a really busy week for all, especially for Mitch. Now, during showings and before accepting offers is a crucial time where initial conversations take place, almost comparable to dating, where Mitch got to know multiple interested parties. Now, usually, when there's interest from multiple parties, you tend to see multiple offers, resulting in a bidding war. Yet with this listing, we clearly stated that no offers were to be presented until requested. And we had decided right from the get-go that we did not want to push this sale into a multiple offer situation. We wanted to be in a position to choose a party and invite them to write an offer. And this is how we structured dealing with offers, and it worked very well. So it became quite clear after a couple meetings on the property with interested parties whether there was or wasn't social and financial alignment. After a week of showings, it came down to 2 parties that fit the bill. It's at this time we reached out to these 2 parties to confirm their interest and that they agreed on the purchase price, our asking price, and the general terms of the agreement overview. So both parties immediately agreed to this, and thus we were now in a position for Mitch to make a big decision, the decision on choosing a buyer he felt would be the best fit. Now, this is not an easy decision to make, yet a crucial decision to be made. Now, after much contemplating and self-reflection, Mitch made his decision and chose the party of his choice. Yet, shortly thereafter, it became known that this person was not in a financial position to move forward with an offer. So I immediately called the second party's agent to inform them that we would be happy to receive an offer from them. They were super happy, came back to them. They submitted an offer, including all of the required specific ownership clauses, and an accepted offer came together. Now, this isn't the first time I've seen a chosen party not work out, and thus parties that don't get chosen do need to know that there is a good chance that the offering could come back to them, and for no hard feelings to be felt for not being the initial chosen party, as making this type of choice is not easy. So Mitch, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation at this time and ask, what was your experience like when it came to choosing a partner?
Yeah, well, I love how you described how much work we did to prep kind of the stage for this these interviews really that we're doing every time that somebody would come to land. It was pretty interesting process to be bringing people on and telling the story and explaining what we were looking for. And it felt like every time that we did it, there was also a certain amount of education that we were trying to do. So I think there was pretty immediately a sense of like some people got it and were into it, and some people were not into it. You know, like they were like, well, this is too weird, this is too much, or they wanted something very different, you know. And I think I had done a lot of work ahead of time to think about who it was I was looking for. Um, and you know, again, various criteria like the financial, knowing that we had the financial ability was obviously huge, but some kind of alignment on values around what they wanted to do there. And I think especially in the end, I was really looking for people that caught the magic of the property and kind of understood, you know, what it would be like living there, and that they were into it, you know, because I knew that I needed somebody who was going to be kind of a similar mindset as me about what we wanted to do with the land. So that in some ways that was a lot of intuition, but I had multiple meetings with both that first buyer, pardon me, that you talked about, and then when that fell through, multiple meetings with the people that we eventually chose. But yeah, it's kind of like dating in a way, you know. It's dating for a business partner and possibly somebody that you're going to be living in community with. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. And in the end, when I chose the people we did chose, we had to go through a lot together. So I think the biggest criteria for me was somebody that I felt I could trust, and that we could. And I think that I'm kind of grateful for all the hard things that we had to go through together, because it did build a level of trust and connection between us that is, you know, going to serve us very well, I think.
Nice, thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we'll get into that, like all of the minutia that you experienced with you know, your new co-owners, right?
Mhm.
So now there's an accepted offer in place, and with that comes a lot of excitement. Yet also with that comes a lot of work. for both the buyer and the seller. So typically when you sell real estate, there isn't much for sellers to do during subject removals, other than making your home vacant for an inspection. Yet in co-ownership sales, there's much for the seller to do, as subjects like financing, insurance, and the co-ownership agreement are for the benefit of the buyer and the seller. So here we go into the subject removal period, which is go time for both parties, as much needs to get done. So speaking of financing, real estate transactions without financing are much more streamlined, yet most of the time financing is required. And thus during the subject removal period, the seller and Mitch, I noticed, may feel like they're being pulled in different directions and may find themselves feeling like they're both selling and buying at the same time. Is with shared financing, the seller and the buyer need to unite under one umbrella mortgage. So Mitch, I'll bring you back in here. I just, one thing during the transaction, I noticed that the subject removal period, I could sense things were really taxing at this time for you, and was wondering, for if anyone here on board is, moving forward and seriously thinking of selling, when it comes to subject removal time, like I was just saying, getting pulled in different directions in a non-typical way. If there's any advice you can give to sellers at this point.
Well, I mean, anybody who's been through real estate, like it's rarely not, or like in my experience anyways, it's very intense, this part where you're actually signing on the dotted line and you're, like you're checking things off and moving towards this. And there's so much legal stuff involved too. So I think as somebody who's not a realtor or involved, maybe not necessarily even that comfortable dealing with legal stuff, it can be super intense because it sometimes don't feel like you have any control over things that are going on. Like you said, you're getting pulled in different directions. So when you're doing it in a non-typical way, I think there's that extra level of like trying to hold on to your value of doing it collaboratively. So, there's lots of times during the subject removal where the whole system is about you never talking to the people that are who are buying your property. It's designed to keep you apart and keep you negotiating. And so we were very clear that we were going to keep in touch. We were going to do this together. So even though it felt really at times, I don't even know if it, against the grain, but I think our biggest commitment was to open communication all the way around. So, that went with you, Brian, but that also meant with them and with their realtor. And you could talk about also the realtor thing that happened too, because so I think my biggest advice around subject removal is to just find ways to keep your feet on the ground and keep it open and remember why you're doing it, and keep reaching out to the people that you can trust, and find people around, you can really trust to be around you, because you really need them, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good for that. Yeah. And as far as other agents, in all of my co-ownership experience and transactions and endeavors, there's a lot of educating for the buyer's agent. And it was an honor working with him. He responded well. And now I can refer other people who are looking for representation, because he's experienced now and kind of understands what he's doing. So getting close to the finish here of this endeavor we were in, as specialists, we have working relationships with lawyers and lenders who have experience in the shared ownership. So those connections were made between Mitch and Angela. So when it was during subject removal period, when the phone call came to the lawyer, he was there, and he took the agreement overview and started on the co-ownership agreement, which is integral to all of this. And buyers and sellers, everyone need to know that these agreements can take time. And but typically the sellers made the connection with the lawyer, so it's the seller's lawyer who's the primary lawyer handling the co-ownership agreement. They'll create a draft. That draft is then shared with the buyers. The buyer will take it to their separate legal representation, review the co-ownership agreement, bounce it back for further edits, and typically it gets bounced back a few times until all parties are comfortable with it under their own legal representation and sign off on the agreement. So by now, There's great excitement as much time and effort, emotional energy and intention has gone into this transaction, both on my side and Mitch and Angela's side. We had gone through the process in full detail, and all of our hard work was finally starting to pay off as the agreement, the financing, and insurance was all organized, and thus the time had finally come for parties to remove conditions and close the deal. So, a journey indeed and well worth the ride. From beginning to end, Mitch and Angela were troopers every step of the way. The deal closed, the buyers moved onto the property. Mitch got to remain on site and remain part owner. Angela received half of the property's entire value, and the rest is history. So, Mitch, I just want to let you know it was a pleasure working with you on this. You're a pioneer to the cause. I couldn't have asked for a better client, buddy.
Thanks, Brian.
Cheers.
Yeah, I think your presentation was really excellent in laying out the whole thing and the way that you guided it and had to really ride lots of waves with us. But I think just would love to give you a shout out that I think your ability to communicate was really, really important in this. And I think the biggest factor for us, our success, was in the end, everybody had a really high standard of communication and talking to each other and collaboration. So like I always felt like you and I were really collaborating together. So really appreciated that.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Brian. That was, I think, a really good overview of what the process looks like and putting it in real world terms. And Mitch, thank you for talking about your experience. While you've been talking, there have been a bunch of really good questions coming in. I will just say the general questions, we're going to have a question section at the end, so I'm going to save them for then. I'm just going to address one right now. Someone asked, wouldn't Angela have only received half of the portion that her and Mitch's sale, half of the 65%? But of course, the beauty of co-ownership is that we can structure the offerings any way you like. And one of the premises of this whole thing was that Angela needed to get her half of the property out as a whole. And so they structured it such that she got the 50% and then Mitch got the other 15%. Or as Mitch said there, basically they sold the property as a whole, and then Mitch was part of the new team buying back in to his own property, right? So we really can, the beauty of this is we can really structure it to suit your needs and to suit your situation. So, all right, so great questions. We will have time to get to them in a little bit. But first I want to hear from David and Judy Hale. I don't know if Judy's with us today as well. As we say in the 80s, David is not just the president, he's also a client, right? So David is a real estate agent in Victoria, specializing in co-ownership. And he specialized in it so much that he realized that this is what he had to do for himself and sold 2/3 of their home. So now we'll take a few minutes to hear David and Judy's story and how they went about doing this.
Awesome. Thank you, Noel. And Mitch and Brian, great job. And I heard the word collaboration. Good work. And your story was quite a bit more complicated than our story. And Judy's in Phoenix with the grandsons, so she's not here with me tonight. But yeah, our story, I think you can change the slide there if you'd like. Started about 10 years ago. You can click again. And essentially, what happened was we've been traveling. We bought this home about 10 years ago, and it had a legal suite on the bottom floor. So it was like a kind of home that you could age in place in. So you could have, like, I was thinking down the road as my mobility changes, if I need to have an entry-level home, something that doesn't have stairs, then I can grow into this home. So that was the only thing I was thinking about initially. 10 years ago, I had no idea that shared home ownership was a thing. So we just bought what we wanted to buy at that time. And so we started traveling in the wintertime. The other thing was it's a very low maintenance property. So we could get out and get away on the weekends. And then we started to become snowbirds and were away for 3 weeks and then 6 weeks and then, up to 6 months. Matter of fact, one time we were away for 11 months, but we consider ourselves snowbirds, and we ended up running into COVID. March 8th, 2020, we were at the Indian Wells tennis tournament. I was getting ready to volunteer at the tennis tournament, and it was all of a sudden it was just all shut down. So we were chased back to Canada. We came across the border. We had people living in our home because we had rented it out through essentially Airbnb, and they had no place to go. They were supposed to go to Europe, so they were trapped sort of in our home. So we took our motorhome, ended up on a friend's acreage out past Souk, and we ended up being there for 9 months. And a lot of things happened, of course. It was a pretty scary time. Real estate sales stopped. I was wondering what I was going to do, if I was going to become a Walmart greeter, or exactly what I was going to happen. So I ended up having to slash all expenses, and I started to think about how do we get money from our assets. And um, so I think you could probably change the slide here again. We didn't have really much cash put aside at all. I used to coming back into town after traveling, starting to sell real estate again. A lot of our money was tied up in our home and in different kind of REITs and World Tree, you know, uh, situations, investments where you got to let the trees grow before you can uh, benefit from any sale of them. So we were having a hard time getting refinancing as well, because we've been traveling so much that our income wasn't great. And we'd been, sort of living off pensions and stuff like that. So um, we finally came up with the idea, my wife and I, the same day, why don't we sell our home? So next slide, please. We immediately thought of Derek and Melissa. They were friends of ours, and they just had a new son that was added to their family. He was about 2 years old at the time, and they were living in a condo, 550 square feet, up at Bear Mountain. And they had given him the bedroom. They moved their bed out into the living room, had to get rid of the couch. And then the lady who moved downstairs started to bang on the ceiling with a broom every time that the little guy would sort of walk around. You know how little 2-year-olds walk. Um, so anyhow, they were just really upset at the whole situation that they were in. They were bringing Jackson in, at night when it was feeding time, and put him to bed. And they just felt like they were sort of, um, hostages in their own home. So we asked them, you interested in buying into our home? We'll sell you 2/3. And so it ended up, long story short, they were over the moon. This is a sort of a picture of the upper 2 floors that they got. They got about 1,600 square feet. We kept the downstairs portion, and we had converted part of the garage as well, most of the garage, into the lower level, because our son, was his suite there for a lot of years. So yeah, could maybe the next slide again. So we essentially came up with a legal agreement. I had a legal agreement designed by my lawyer several years ago. I started shared home ownership in 2017, around the same time Noam started his venture as well with CoHo. And so basically, we refinanced the mortgage. It was kind of perfect timing. We ended up the mortgage needed to be renewed anyway, so we were able to take out some money from the property. We withdrew up to about 80% loan to value. And so we share the home 1/3 and 2/3. So that goes to mortgage, taxes, the strata, utilities, insurance, and the maintenance cost to run the home. We split all that. We have a joint bank account. Judy runs that, pays the bills out of that account. And every few months or couple times a year, we look at, what kind of adjustments, do we need to make, who's added TV channels. Now I've got an electric car, so we're plugging in, using a little bit more power. So, we're giving up a little bit more to them for electricity costs. So all in all, we have a great partnership. So next slide. And there we go. We're still traveling. Life is short. That's what I like to tell people. And so this is one way for people to get into real estate, get a foothold, start building some equity, start paying the principal payment down. And as we know, real estate always goes up in value over time. So best to have your foot in it. And yeah, my advice is be careful going over the falls in a barrel. Thanks, Noam.
Thank you, David. Really a pioneer in this model. There's a very particular question here. Does this mean that you have a mortgage payment as well as the family? And the answer there,
Yes.
yes. So you pay your third
Yeah.
of the mortgage, and they pay their 2/3 of the mortgage.
Correct. Yeah.
And there, as I said earlier, there are some products like the Van City Mixer Mortgage that would allow you to structure it differently. So I think in
Yeah.
your case, you each did an 80% loan to value. And so, you can use basically
Right.
any mortgage product. But if you had wanted to keep all your equity in the property and have no mortgage, and they had wanted to do an 80% leverage, you could, or you wanted to say only have 50% leverage and they have 80% leverage. There are ways that these mixer mortgages allow you to structure that financing, and then each of you repay your share.
And we are with Van City as well.
Fantastic. And then you were able to, follow-up question here, you were able to then use some of that money to travel with and some of that money to invest in other models.
Yes. And that's where the bus came from and the tow car. So yeah, that was just before we took our trip across Canada and spent 11 months on the road.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. To everyone on the call, please do keep putting your questions in the chat. I promise we will get to them. There are some really great questions popping up, and I'm sure there's more in your head. So put them down, or just hold on to them, and you can ask them verbally in a few moments when we get there. So thank you, David, for sharing your story. I'm going to
You're
go
welcome.
a little bit quickly through these next few slides because we are running low on time. But just to point out again that this co-ownership agreement, the legal structure is key. And there are many things that will go into your co-ownership agreement, things like the financing, the percentage of ownership, the forms of ownership, the purpose and vision, how you're managing the property, your respective roles and responsibilities, what are shared resources and expenses, what are private resources and expenses, what rules might you have, what will you do in delinquency, what's your social framework for decision making, how are you going to deal with conflict resolution, what's your exit strategy. There's really a lot that goes into it, but having this stuff in place from the beginning is key. We do hear about once or twice a year about co-ownership agreements that have gone bad and gone through the courts, and there are always times when the people did not do a proper co-ownership agreement. They did not do their due diligence in advance. They don't have a plan, and the co-ownership agreement is a key piece of making sure that it becomes a document you can go to in the courts if you ever need to, but reality is you don't get there because you've had the important conversations in advance, you have a plan, you have a document you can refer to, etc. So as Brian said, we help you create, the realtors at CoHo will help you create a co-ownership overview of what would go into that agreement, and then the lawyers would help you draft that up legally and get that signed. So I'll go through this stuff really quickly because really Brian did a great job presenting this. Like, what is the process of selling a share in a property? So the first stage is establishing the offering, right? What are your needs? What housing / land opportunities are available on your property? Because it needs to match the reality of what houses are there, or what building opportunities are there, or what can you do on the property, and how best can you achieve your needs in a way that reflects your property's options and creates an appealing offering for a buyer. And that's the key part there, right? Is creating that balance. And Brian talked about this. And your CoHo BC affiliated realtor can help you structure this and create that offering that suits your needs and that is appealing to a buyer, and that hopefully is so appealing that you have multiple buyers interested. So as Brian said, you can have them compete on fit. And that's one of the most exciting pieces about this. I sold half a house in Vancouver last year, and the way the house was set up and the product and the price point, the seller didn't have to let go of any value. The price point reflected the true market value of the property, but it was such an appealing product that we had 12 interested parties in the property, and the remaining party got to date them and choose the right fit. So I love that idea of competing on fit instead of competing on price. Though we can also have competing on price if that's your top priority, is maximizing your dollar. But generally, finding the best partner is usually a higher priority for most sellers. So once you've established the offering, right, you establish the legal and structural framework, right? That's that co-ownership overview that Brian talked about. And again, we will help you with using our co-ownership checklist and our sample agreement overviews to create an overview that you think is strong and works for you, and then that becomes part of your marketing. If there's some minor things that a buyer wants to change, they'd rather have, instead of a 5-year lockout period, a 3-year lockout period, or when it's time to an exit strategy, instead of it being a 12-month process, they want it to be a 9-month process. Like, these things can still be negotiated, but off the bat, their buyers are saying, I agree with your vision, I agree with your structure, I agree with this overall idea of how this relationship would look forward. And if a buyer looks at your agreement and says, I don't agree with any of this stuff, they're not the right buyer for you. And then it really is a dating process. Mitch and Brian mentioned this as well, right? It's dating, engagement, and marriage. So the first part of the dating is the marketing and the self-promotion. So, the co-affiliated realtors can market it either through the CoHo network or publicly on MLS. And you can market it through your own social sphere. A lot of times we find people find the buyer, like David did here, through their own social network. So we can help you frame the offering that you can then take to your community. And then once you have a potential buyer, you date them. You hang out a few times, you discuss your quirks, you discuss your vision, you discuss your timelines, you discuss, how you use housing, all these kind of things to make sure they're the right partner. Then if you feel like they're a good fit, you move into the engagement phase, where you really talk even in more detail. You disclose your financial situation. You talk about what the likelihood is of having to move and divorce, your health, all that kind of stuff. You get pre-approved for your financing if you need that. You draft your partnership agreement. So all this stuff is done before you actually remove subjects, before you're legally bound to each other. That's the engagement phase, a very important phase. And then the marriage phase, you sign the partnership agreement, you remove subjects on the property, and you make it a reality. And then you host a really rockin' housewarming party and you invite us. Don't forget to invite us. That's very important. So that's really the overview of what it takes and how we make this work. There were some, as I said, some really good questions. So I am going to go through some of them right now. I've also changed the security settings so that you can unmute yourself and start your video if you want to ask your questions directly. And hopefully this gives you a really good sense of what it would take. In general, I'll have a few slides at the end, of what happens next. But of course, if you want to talk about your specific situation or ask very practical questions, feel free to reach out to CoHo at cohobc@gmail.com. Or if you're in, Vancouver, Victoria, or Mid-Island, reach out directly to David, Brian, or myself, and we can talk about your situation and how to make it work. So let's go through some of these really fantastic questions and hopefully help you with this. So we have a question here from Christine. How much higher are lawyer fees for a co-ownership agreement versus traditional real estate transaction? So, the lawyer fees tend to be in the $2,000 to $3,000 range to draft a co-ownership agreement like this. by using a CoHo affiliated realtor and coming to your lawyer with a good agreement overview, we can help reduce those costs to some degree because they don't have to spend time being a mediator and presenting the questions, then sending you back to discuss them and think about them. So generally, when you've been doing this through a CoHo agent, you can be on the lower end of that range. But there is that cost involved, and that is in addition to whatever traditional real estate transaction cost there'd be, the $1,000 to $1,500 for conveyance and transfer of title and registering the mortgage and all those general costs. Then somebody follows up, how about fees for the CoHo experts? What is the valuable expertise worth? The valuable expertise is definitely worth millions and millions, because it'll avoid you having to go to the courts and fight over these $1 million properties. But fortunately for you, we don't charge millions. Our fees generally, when you use us as real estate agents, all of this additional expertise comes included in our real estate services. So we tend to charge, fees in line with most of the industry. And I can't speak to, each of us are independent contractors and we all have our own fee structure, but they tend to be in line. I like to joke a lot that, the CoHo pros do 4 times as much work for half as much money, right? Because selling of the full property is fairly simple. Selling a half a property is at least twice as much work, and we get paid half as much. But when you use us as real estate agents, the real estate folks, all that stuff comes included in the real estate fees. Clearly, there are additional costs for lawyers and financing if you have to get an appraisal and things like that. If you aren't using a traditional real estate model, if you're selling to a friend or you've already co-bought with somebody and you want our expertise, we do consulting at about $250 an hour. So that is available to people as well. Next question. Can a co-ownership agreement be a timeshare agreement? So instead of sharing space, half the house each, you share access. And the answer is absolutely, right? That's been done for a lot. People co-owning vacation properties, 2 or 3 folks, and they each get, half or a third. And that requires many of the same conversations and questions, and definitely should also require a similar legal agreement. It's very similar. There's even more complexities when you're cohabitating, more, rules around, or more things to discuss around behavior and guidelines and communication, but certainly we can help you do a share in space or a share in time, whichever makes sense in your situation. Other ones here. There's some really great comments from Z and other people. Thank you for adding in your experience. If I miss any questions, please throw them back in at the end. Question here. Can ownership agreement be a barter rather than a monetary exchange? So what if somebody puts in sweat equity, building out the farm or building a house on the property, landscaping, handiwork, caregiving? And the answer is absolutely. Again, the beauty of this is that it's very flexible. We can work around your vision. And as long as both parties agree to the way you create value and you assign value, and then we work with a lawyer to formalize that in a legal agreement, then we definitely can make that work. So we're definitely working with groups where, one person has really built out the farm, for example, or done major improvements to the land and is getting sweat equity in that, and that number can be fixed. You can, get a certain point, and then you've earned your 30%, 50%, or you can create a system where that develops over time. So it's really a flexible model where we sit down with you, look at your situation, and figure out the best pathway forward. Question here again about realtor fees. I already answered that one. It's included in our general sale fee structure, or we do consulting. Mitch, by the way, I don't know if you caught this, it went through the thing, but Mitch offered to be available to people who would like to ask questions about his experience. So if in addition to reaching out to Brian, David, or myself, you can feel free to reach out to Mitch. His email is in the string on the chat as well. Question about capital gains, and I'm running through this quickly because I know we're running low on time. What is the effect of capital gains when it's not a primary residence? If it's not your primary residence, you are subject to capital gains based on the portion of the property that you own. So if there's two owners, one lives in there and one doesn't live in there, the person who lives in there, their 50% would be capital gains free. The person who is an investor, their 50% would be subject to capital gains. So it's treated like any other investment. I see. Is sold off. I assume the share such portion that is sold is off is a percentage of the market value. Therefore, the value of the share fluctuates with the market. Absolutely, right? If you try to find a buyer, they're going to be responsive to the market. Right? They're not going to want to overpay for a share in a property necessarily, right? The whole point here is to create value for everybody. So generally that structure would fluctuate, though there are some examples of groups who create what they call fixed equity co-ops. So basically it's money in, money out, and it doesn't appreciate with the market. It's a way of creating some long-term affordable options and a little more stability in the marketplace. But that can be problematic for folks who, when they leave, need to take their equity and buy something else in a fluctuating market. So again, you can decide how to structure your legal agreements, whether you want to have a fixed equity model, but the vast majority of groups do a market valuation based approach. Yes, there a question verbally coming in? Okay. Another question here, lots of great questions. If you start with no mortgage as a seller, do you end up with a mortgage in the co-ownership? And that's going to depend on your situation, on your co-buyer. If you're someone who has no mortgage and you refuse to have a mortgage, you do not want to deal with the banks, it's no way, no how, no way, no how, then you can set a statement that says there is no financing available on this property. And that it will limit your buyer pool, right? Only people who have the cash can come in. But it certainly, we see groups like that create that structure of an offering saying, I'm not willing to co-sign on a mortgage. Or again, you could go in with no mortgage and you could, your co-buyer or your buyer could have a mortgage. And while you would be on the mortgage legally, you wouldn't actually have to pay any of that mortgage, right? They would pay all the mortgage for their portion. Somebody also mentions that, a vendor take-back mortgage, or VTB, vendor take-back. So basically, this is another option if you don't want to involve the banks, or if you don't need all your equity up front, maybe you will turn it into an ongoing revenue stream. So somebody buys 50%, but only puts 10% down as cash, and then you become the lender and you loan to them. You also can do a rent to own model, although the vendor take back model is usually a better model in that it fixes your purchase price and your legal ownership at that time up front. Question here from out of province: how much support can you give someone out of province? The CoHo BC Realtors can't sell your property out of province, but we certainly can do consultation. We have consulted with groups in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, and even in the States to some degree. So you can feel free to reach out to us to see if, how we can help you create that offering that then you can promote to your friends or family. Or if you want to hire a realtor in your region who doesn't have any clue what this is about, we can work with them to help them understand how to create an offering. Do we have networks in other provinces we can recommend? There are initiatives in Ontario that we know about. There's a realtor in Hamilton, or a realtor in Guelph. There's a mortgage broker team in Hamilton. There's a great group called Housemates and GoCo Solutions in Toronto. There are groups in other parts of the country. There aren't in the places that are not served by those particular initiatives. We are looking at how we can build those connections and networks. So if you know somebody who'd be a great partner, feel free to connect them to us. And as I said, we can certainly help you create the offering that you could take to people locally. If a co-owner wishes to sell their interest, does it typically take longer or have a lower value than a single owner real estate sale? So these are two very good questions. So take longer, absolutely, right? And not because it's harder to find a buyer. Sometimes it's easy to find a buyer if the product is right, if the share creates a product that is much, let's say, cheaper than what an equivalent product would be. So I'll go back to the half a house I sold in East Vancouver. A 1,200 square foot half duplex in East Vancouver near Trout Lake would sell for 1.3 to 1.4 million, but this half a house was selling for 1 million. And so it was really appealing, and we had a line out the door for it. So, you can find buyers quickly, but the sale process takes longer because you need to date them, you need to choose the right partner, you need to create that legal agreement, which usually takes 3 weeks to a month because lawyers are not the fastest on turnaround. They don't work on the same timeline that realtors do. So the actual contract process can take longer. And of course, your buyer pool is smaller. There's less people interested, whether it's 50% or 20%, but of the market, but there's less people interested. But if you create the right product, it can draw a lot of attention. So it doesn't necessarily take months, but I would give yourself 6 weeks to 2 months or 6 weeks from like when you start to market to when you would hope to have a firm deal, just so that you can go through that dating and engagement stage diligently and effectively. Does it have a lower value? And the answer is, if you do it right, absolutely not, right? Because the savings for the buyer is not in the fact that they're buying a discounted product, is that they're buying a product that is discounted compared to an equivalent strata product. So, if it doesn't create that value, if in your particular marketplace the half a house is not a better deal than a half duplex or a similar sized townhouse or condo, then maybe you do have to discount it to create a sale, and then maybe it doesn't make sense for you. But generally, in most of these situations, the half a house creates much better value than buying strata. And therefore you can get full value for your share while still creating an appealing and affordable product for your partner. Also, the value here is not just in money, right? That's the value is in, again, community, in access to neighborhoods, in staying in your own area. So hopefully you find a buyer who values that as well. So even if it is, the same price for a half duplex as a half a house, maybe they'll see the value in that connection, especially if it's, if they're friends or family, etc. But yeah, we do try to create products where you get full value for your property and the buyer sees a great deal because it's better than what they could buy otherwise. Other questions here. Do you need surveying of land to determine which part is owned by whom? You don't need surveying. You could choose to do that, but a lot of groups will just draw a kind of a mini strata plan for themselves, a breakdown. And again, as long as you all agree on the value, it doesn't really matter what's on the ground. So, my house might be slightly bigger than your house, but it's in a better location. Or, maybe they're the exact same size, but mine is top floor, yours is bottom floor. So we come to an agreement. Is it 50-50? Is it 55-45? And as long as everyone agrees on what is a fair allocation and what is private space and what is communal space, then you just, lock that in via your legal agreement. So you don't necessarily need to survey or to make it exactly proportionate to what's on the ground. You just have to make it an offering that both of you are happy with. And then the big question comes with resale. So it can be disproportionate too, right? Someone can occupy half the property and only own 25%. as long as both of you are happy with that, that's fine. And then maybe you allocate ongoing costs at, you know, at 50-50, even though ownership is 25-75. That is fine. And that is fine for down the road for first right of refusal to buy your partner out. That's fine when for third step for trying to sell the whole property as a whole. You take your 75, your 25, and you go. That only really becomes an issue if you're trying to resell shares. And now that person who has a 75% stake, but only 50% of the housing, might find a hard time reselling that share. But you can really work this any way you like. So often, usually the ownership stake reflects the occupancy stake, but not always. We also see groups where basically you buy in with whatever money you have, and then you run the property a bit like a rental property. So you're the owner of the rental property and you're the tenant. So you pay your fair market rent to the collective, right? So if you are occupying more space than you own, you're kind of part renter, part tenant, part owner. And if you occupy less space than you own, then you're kind of part landlord, part owner. So there's really a lot of creativity to how you can make this work. Can you please talk about how viable it is to sell one's shares later on? Is it easy or difficult? And again, I just said it really depends on how you structure the offering. We've had great success reselling shares, and we've had properties that we couldn't resell the shares because just the way the house was allocated, the way the house broke down, the way the value was at, there was so much value in the land, but not enough value in the house itself. You know, I was trying to sell a house in East Vancouver last year that was 3 suites, but it was owned 50-50. So, and it was on a really big lot. So the total value of the land was very high for the amount of housing that you actually got. So that one we weren't able to sell, but I sold another one where the values really worked beautifully, and you know, people got a lot of housing for a low price, and we had 12 people lined out the door. So it's going to depend on how you structure the offering to make sure that it is a viable resellable product. If it's a good product, we have found it very easy to resell. And as Brian mentioned earlier, sometimes when the first potential partner falls through, we go back and remarket it. We find another one. We've had a property that Brian's been selling in Arrington that for a variety of reasons, the first couple of partners have not worked out. But because the product is so appealing, we've been able to just find a new person to step in and replace them. And that's been very successful. What else is in here? I have a cabin for sale in Shawnigan Lake, but it's only half-time occupancy. Okay, but
Dan.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, that's this little connection there.
Okay. Any other questions that I've missed? I'm going through it's a very big list here. I'm trying to catch them in them. Any Brian or David, anything to add to any of the answers that I've given? I've kind of been just talking.
Yeah, well, speaking to like, proportionate, that like the Arrington property, it's a 30% portion of a property, and that co-owner is going to have the exact same kind of housing as the 70% owner, but there's a bunch of rental properties on the property, so there's a lot of value in the rental. So that's how that works out. So yeah, I just want to touch base on that. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
There's hundreds and hundreds of situations that, there's just so much. We could go on all night.
But there really is room for creativity and autonomy and structuring things, and that's why some people just have a hard time making something like this happen, is because you don't know where to start. So that's what we're bringing to the table is a formula, and guiding people and endeavors, and like I was saying earlier, like exploring those scenarios and choosing one that resonates with you and not forcing it. Yeah, so there really is like an infinite amount of ways you can structure these.
So I know we've gone over time, and some people have left. We really appreciate those of you who are sticking around. So something to just stuff going on. Here's the example of that Arrington property that I mentioned before. Please do check out the resources on our website, the guide to co-ownership, questions for partnership agreements, and our YouTube channel, where there's some great interviews with lawyers and financiers and mediators, etc. We encourage you to come to our upcoming events. If you want a much more detailed, there's a comment here about how the first 30 minutes was repeat stuff, and we apologize for that because many of the folks here were here for the first time. I felt like we needed to do some of that foundational stuff, but we go into much more detail about all that first stuff coming up there. So sign up for our What is Real Estate Co-Ownership session in April, or come to one of our events. And most importantly, reach out to us. Somebody just asked, can they do a consultation to try to figure out the sellable shares? Absolutely, we can reach out to us. We'll examine your property, examine your situation, examine your needs, and try to create an offering that would make sense for you. So here's our contact information. Listed here, and please do reach out to us to discuss your specific situations. Any other closing questions or comments? I see there's been some requests for more sessions on selling. We'll explore what might make sense in terms of more of this. And absolutely, again, if you have questions, you want to learn more, just reach out to us and we'll talk to you one-on-one about how it works. So thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you for being interested in this new form of home ownership and home sales. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at future events, and hopefully working with you to find the right partner, the right community, the right structure for you and your property.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.